Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to take a dense stack of sources, and this week it's a huge one, outlining a full-blown corporate acquisition battle and just this existential panic in Hollywood.
It really is a panic.
And we're going to deliver only the essential knowledge you need. We're giving you the shortcut to understanding what might be the biggest media consolidation fight of the decade.
And today, we're looking straight into the eye. The projections we're seeing are dire. Some reports are suggesting the year 2026 isn't just going to be tough for Hollywood. It's being described as ominous.
Ominous. And that's not just about a quarterly earnings dip, right? This is something deeper.
Much deeper. It reflects a deep structural rot in the whole business model.
And ominous really feels like the right word here, because we are not talking about, minor shakeups or a small dip in streaming numbers.
Yeah.
Our sources are detailing a genuine existential crisis, and it spans the entire media ecosystem, from the huge film studios making our blockbusters right down to the bedrock of traditional journalism.
And at the absolute center of this crisis is a massive high-stakes corporate tug-of-war for Warner Brothers Discovery, or WBD.
Right.
For you listening, if you don't track financial news every day, WBD is this gigantic entity that was created from the merger of Warner Media. It is the prize.
It's the prize, and you have two incredibly powerful suitors battling for it. On one side, you've got Netflix, the established streaming Goliath. Their name is basically synonymous with subscription entertainment. And on the other side, you have Paramount Skydance, which is backed by the just enormous financial weight and political influence of the Ellison family.
And that's the key. This conflict is about so much more than just who gets to own Batman or Harry Potter. It really highlights these deep fears about unchecked corporate consolidation, about predatory content strategy.
Yeah, the really controversial part.
The most controversial part. The potential for political influence over globally significant news entities, specifically CNN.
So that's what we're going to break down. We're going to look at exactly what each acquisition scenario means for you, the consumer, the creator, and frankly, the citizen.
We have to analyze the economic consequences of a Netflix takeover versus the potential political fallout under this Ellison-backed Paramount bid.
It really feels like a choice between two bad scenarios, and we need to understand the costs of each one. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with that broad and truly alarming diagnosis from the source. They're specifically citing an NPR report predicting 2026 will look ominous for media, and that's everything from Hollywood to journalism. Why 2026? Why that year, and why such dramatic language?
Well, the central warning is a sobering one. It suggests that the current pain we're seeing, the massive layoffs, the content purges, the constant restructuring.
It's everywhere.
It's just the market adjusting before the real storm. As bad as the media environment feels today, the report suggests it is easy to imagine how things will get worse in 2020.
So this isn't the end of the pain, it's just the beginning.
It's a precursor, and it's all driven by the massive, massive debt that was accrued during those streamer wars a few years ago.
That context of instability is so crucial. And the sources detail exactly why traditional journalism in particular is struggling so badly. It's facing what they call a three-pronged assault.
Three-pronged assault that's just fundamentally undermining its public trust and its financial viability.
So what are the three prongs?
The sources detail them really clearly. First, traditional journalism is being buffeted on all sides by misinformation.
Right.
Second, weak need ownership. And third, a hostile White House.
Let's break that down. So misinformation erodes the public's ability to even know what's true.
Exactly. Then weak need ownership. That means corporate owners who prioritize, keeping things calm over aggressive investigative reporting.
We don't want to rock the boat.
Don't rock the boat. And finally, a hostile political environment that actively tries to delegitimize and even defund these news operations.
And that combination means these outlets are just struggling fiercely to earn back public trust, even though, ironically, the need for accurate, impartial reporting is supposedly growing.
But here's where it gets in, because the source material pushes back, and it pushes back sharply, on the idea that it's all just external forces to blame for this decline in journalism.
Okay, so what's the counter?
Well, this is the controversial, but I think essential point the sources make us confront. The argument isn't just that the audience left. The argument is that these outlets are in this dire position precisely because they were not fair and accurate enough to maintain a loyal, nonpartisan audience.
So the source is saying they couldn't carry that audience through the financial storm because they'd already alienated a huge chunk of it.
That's the theory, yes. If they had maintained this rigid impartiality, the source posits they would theoretically still have the broad national audience numbers, the sheer volume of subscribers to survive.
So the source suggests they traded long-term financial stability for, short-term political alignment? And that was the fatal flaw.
That's the argument. And it creates this truly destructive cycle. As these struggling outlets fail or they get consolidated, you have fewer and fewer wealthy business people controlling larger and larger sections of the country's information.
And those owners often have other corporate interests, political, financial, global, that might be at odds with what the public needs from a news organ.
Precisely. They might pit those interests against the public's desire for reporting that could challenge powerful institutions, including, well, themselves.
And that instability in journalism is mirrored perfectly by these tectonic shifts in Hollywood. The diagnosis there is just as stark. The era of the traditional studio system is officially over.
The tech bros have won. That's the phrase.
So what does that actually mean, tech bro takeover? What does that look like for creativity and for jobs?
It means the fundamental operating philosophy has completely, it's gone from entertainment first to data and efficiency first. And that victory has immediate practical consequences for everyone, from screenwriters to your local cinema op.
Right, like consolidation.
Exactly. One key consequence is the inevitable consolidation of studio, which means fewer jobs across the board. Layoffs in marketing, distribution, development, because the tech-focused owners just see all that as bloat. They operate with a different philosophy.
And that philosophy is nowhere clearer than in how they think about theatrical windows.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, traditionally, Hollywood relied on a long, exclusive run in theaters, often 90 days, to make money, build buzz, justify all that marketing spend.
Right. The 90-day window was sacred. The tech model views that window as, at best, a short, maybe 4 to 6 week marketing opportunity.
Just a big ad for the streaming release.
That's it. Before the content moves immediately and permanently into the streaming. The goal is library retention, not box office profit. And as the source describes, this shift is lethal for cinema. Their whole business model depends on that.
And this change in ownership philosophy is directly impacting labor negotiations. That's a major concern in the source material. They raise this specific, frankly, chilling concern that the upcoming union negotiation, they could be among the last normal negotiations we see.
Normal, as in based on the value of human labor and intellectual property.
Right.
And that normality is being threatened by quick and expansive adoption of AI technology, changing the leverage balance incredibly fast. Studios have a new and terrifying backup plan if they decide to strike.
Let's dig into that, because the source is highly specific about this threat. The studios are basically gaining the ability to say, that's okay, fire up the chatbot.
It's a terrifying thought. The threat, as it's detailed in the source, is using generative AI like ChatGPT to produce content. It just fundamentally shifts the power dynamic away from human creativity and toward machine efficiency and radical cost.
The source quotes the specific fear that studios could argue they can write better shows than the Duffer Brothers with ChatGPT.
Now, whether that's technically true today is highly debatable.
Of course.
But the threat itself is potent. It positions creative labor as immediately replaceable, commodifiable, which fundamentally changes the conversation away from salaries and residuals and toward the very definition of creative.
So this isn't just a Hollywood problem. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests that workers in any knowledge-based field journalism, programming, even law, need to watch these negotiations very closely.
Absolutely do. If the studios successfully break labor based on an AI threat, it sets a terrible precedent for other sectors facing similar pressures. It makes the vulnerability of media a universal labor concern. So if that larger crisis, the debt, the AI threat, if that forms the background, then the battle for WBD is the seismic event right in the foreground.
Yeah, this is the main event.
We are talking about the largest media deal in recent years. It involves a gigantic media company with enormous cultural and financial weight.
And let's just clarify WBD's strategic value for you, listeners. It is astronomical. It's got this highly diverse and valuable portfolio that makes it attractive to both tech companies and legacy media buyers.
You've got the major streamers, specifically the premium HBO Max, which is now just called Max.
Right. And you have one of Hollywood's biggest, most historic film studios, Warner Brothers. I mean, decades of irreplaceable blockbuster IP.
And crucially, you have HBO itself. The source describes it as TV's most consistent source of high-quality. Despite all the corporate shifts, HBO still has that reputation.
It's the crown jewel, really. It still wins awards. It drives the cultural conversation.
It does. And then there's the political element. The deal includes one of the news industry's largest, most globally recognized brands, CNN.
And that is what elevates this from just a business deal about Batman and Harry Potter to this explosive political and cultural flash. It's what's drawing the attention of presidents and regulators.
So you've got this gigantic prize, and you have two primary suitors locked in this tug of war. As of the reporting we have, Netflix appears poised to win. They seem to have the financial and acquisition momentum right.
That momentum is fragile, though. The WBD board reportedly just rejected the latest bid from Paramount. And Paramount's bid is led by their new CEO, David Ellison, who runs Skydance Media. And it's backed by the vast personal wealth of his father, the tech mogul Larry Ellison.
And that rejection doesn't mean Paramount is out of the game. Not at all. Especially given the significant regulatory hurdles Netflix is facing, which we'll get into.
Right. But the universal fear, and this is detailed across all the sources, shared by almost everyone inside the industry, is that regardless of who wins, the outcome will not be good for Hollywood.
It's not seen as a necessary consolidation. It's seen as inherently destructive to the creative ecosystem.
And the sources are incredibly specific about the predicted strategy, no matter who the buyer is. They predict one single goal.
What's that?
The buyer will strip mine the valuable IP.
Strip mine. That's a strong phrase.
It is. It means focusing, 90% of resources exclusively on established, bankable, repeatable franchise. Batman, Superman, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, anything that is a known safe bet.
So what happens to everything else? The mid-budget movies, the original ideas, the slightly riskier projects that develop the next generation of talent?
Well, according to the source, the buyer will either mothball or sell off the rest of it.
Mothballing.
Yeah.
So shelving it indefinitely, never letting it see the light of day.
Exactly. Or selling off the rest, which effectively means letting the less profitable stuff, the non-tentpole content, just rot.
Yeah.
Or be sold for pennies to smaller, less funded operations.
So it's a model that's purely profit-driven. It's an asset-stripping exercise where diversity and mid-tier production are just sacrificed for blockbusters and streaming metrics.
It's like an internal cultural extinction event, where the studio stops being a diverse content incubator and just becomes an IP farm.
So let's explore that first path. Scenario A, Netflix successfully acquires W. This would immediately create an unprecedented scope of consolidation.
Unprecedented is absolutely the word. A Netflix win would combine streaming operations that total about 420 million subscriptions between the two companies.
420 million.
I mean, to put that in perspective, that represents a gargantuan, dominant global footprint for subscription entertainment. It gives them enormous leverage over content costs and what they charge consumers.
And the immediate risk factor the sources cite is the total lack of any indication of how this massive new company would even be managed.
Right.
Will they follow, say, a Disney model and let subsidiaries like HBO operate somewhat independently, preserve their creative identity, or will they impose a single streamlined Netflix vision, pushing HBO's quality down for the sake of volume and efficiency?
The sources are leaning heavily toward the second option. They're predicting significant economic consequence that would immediately hit both consumers and the industry labor force. It's not just about price. It's about control.
Let's start with consumers. Netflix is expected to leverage this massive control of the market to raise subscription price.
And the parallel they cite in the source is the experience with Hulu. Once Disney gained complete control, the prices went through the roof.
That parallel hits home for a lot of us who remember the early days of cord cutting. The source reminds us how affordable when Disney was over. I mean, prices soared by over 40% in years.
And Netflix's premium tier is already over $20 a month. If they control WBD's library of classics and prestige content, customers would have almost nowhere left to turn.
So that's the consumer price. Then they're expected to leverage their control of production, having essentially eliminated a major competitor for content, to lower wages for content.
It makes sense. With that much dominance in distribution and production, they could basically dictate terms to writers, directors, actors with very little competitive.
And then there's that theatrical industry risk, which, as we discussed, is existential for cinema. Netflix's business model has traditionally de-emphasized the cinema.
Right, it's all about the streaming library.
The prediction is that a merged company would insist on short theatrical runs for movies, specifically to hobble the theater industry and move content quickly to the platform. They might offer token theatrical releases for awards, but not for genuine revenue.
That's a definition of that tech bro philosophy triumphing over traditional.
And this approach is backed up by Netflix's known labor relations. The source specifically referenced comments CEO Ted Sarandos during past strike. He indicated a clear willingness to pivot content sourcing to places without strong.
He specifically named countries like Korea and.
He did, basically saying if domestic labor costs get too high, they'll swear.
Okay, so that's the detailed economic and industrial argument against the Netflix acquisition. But what makes this a true political flash is the second part of the narrative, the political and ideological pushback.
The Trump factor.
The Trump factor. And this is where we need to be very careful and just report what the sources say.
Absolutely.
Former President Trump has indicated publicly that he is really not into Netflix buying Warner Brothers. He specifically wants to stop the streamers' so-called cultural take.
And this led to him retweeting a specific commentary that urged the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade, the agencies that review these mergers, to treat this deal as a top-tier antitrust.
And the argument in that piece was explicit. The concern wasn't just about market implications.
No, it was about what the merger means for free expression in America and for cultural pluralism.
So the core of this ideological argument is detailed very starkly in that commentary. It accuses Netflix of being a company that has repeatedly used its global platform to elevate progressive narratives while suppressing dissenting viewpoints.
And this is framed as a matter of cultural censorship, something that antitrust regulators should weigh just as heavily as market share.
Which brings us to that really charged phrase used in the source, the call for Trump and his allies to step in against Netflix to reverse the damage from a woke media monopoly.
Right. The fear is that the merger would consolidate cultural narrative control under a politically activist banner, making it even harder for conservative viewpoints to find mainstream, high-budget platforms.
But wait, let's look at that characterization of Netflix as a woke media monopoly. Is that entirely accurate based on the source's own analysis? Because as you noted, Netflix's library is incredibly diverse, even contradictory.
That's the necessary nuance the source provides. It's important to note the source itself offers a counter-argument to this idea that everything on Netflix is universally woke. The platform hosts very diverse content, including controversial, often conservative-leaning figures like Dave Chappelle.
Right. His specials have generated a huge amount of debate.
Exactly. So the key observation here is that Netflix may not micromanage projects as heavily as other networks. It often leads to a creative free-for-all, meaning you can have very progressive content right next to content that's considered anti-woke or deeply cynical about political activism.
So the ideological issue might be less with a universal Netflix mandate from the top and more with the individual people, the showrunners, writers, producers that Netflix hires or whose studios they acquire.
That seems to be the argument. Netflix provides the platform and the budget, allowing a wide, sometimes contradictory range of content to exist at the same time. However, the political argument remains that by consolidating distribution, they are still giving a massive global loudspeaker, primarily to a progressive-leaning creative class.
Okay, so now let's pivot to scenario B, a win for Paramount Skydance, backed by the Ellison. If the Netflix scenario was mainly about economic decay and cultural consolidation, this one seems to be centered far more on potential political interference.
Exactly. This is a different flavor. The Paramount bid is bolstered by the personal wealth of tech mogul Larry Ellison. Just for context, he's the co-founder of Oracle, and his personal wealth is astronomical. It gives him immense latitude to pursue these kinds of acts.
And he's explicitly described in the sources as an ally of Trump.
Correct. And the sources also point out that this is not his only massive media play. Larry Ellison also leads a group of investors who are poised to acquire the incredibly influential social media platform TikTok.
So that detail connects his financial power directly to major social media and potentially legacy. It suggests a coordinated media and social media influence strategy.
And the central role of CNN in this entire WBD acquisition debate cannot be stated. According to the sources, this news network is the primary driving concern for the anti-Netflix, pro-Ellison side, and specifically for former President Trump. It's the highest political chip on the table.
Trump has openly stated he wants the ownership of CNN to change, and the source material attributes this desire to CNN's historical, tough reporting and criticism of his administration.
So the acquisition of WBD by an ally gives him an opportunity to fundamentally change CNN's editorial direction without any official political decree.
And the speculation is quite direct in the source. They suggest Trump wants the Ellisons to own WBD precisely so he can get rid of CNN, or at least fundamentally change its editorial direction staffing.
And the sources even suggest how. They mention installing someone like Bari Weiss to alter its output and shift its political positioning.
For those who don't know that name, Bari Weiss is a former New York Times editor. She's known for her vocal critiques of what she views as illiberalism and progressive overreach in media and culture.
So installing her, or someone with a similar philosophy, would signal an immediate drastic shift away from the center-left reputation that CNN. It would effectively satisfy that political desire to end the perception CNN.
And this whole WBD fight is happening within a much larger, observable political movement among tech and media giants. We're seeing this general pivot away from what was perceived as far-left activism and alignment over the last decade.
It's a noticeable trend. The sources cite high-profile examples to illustrate it. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Tim Cook at Apple are described as walking back previous positions on political and social. They're starting to show a remarkable degree of tolerance or even outright support for Trump and his movement.
And the key insight from the sources' analysis is that this shift is driven purely by business pragmatism.
Purely. These companies go where they think the money is going. For a decade, the conventional wisdom was that the market was moving culturally far left. So media companies went all in on the woke stuff because they thought it was the path to sustainable growth for audience.
But then, according to the source, the last election acted as a wake-up call.
Huge wake-up call. The realization was that while a certain segment of the audience demanded that politically aligned content, Alienating a massive segment of the center and the right was just financially sustainable.
So the pragmatic calculation became, if we want to keep making money and operating without political interference, we might have to tolerate Trump and adjust our political posture.
That's the argument. And it's affecting social media as well, which is why the TikTok acquisition is relevant. The source notes the political pivot of platforms like X, formerly Twitter, under its new ownership, and it expresses this frustration from the left that there are fewer political sanctuaries, that there's no middle ground in media ownership more.
So let's talk about the highest stakes concern raised by these highly politicized media acquisitions. It's about federal governance.
Yeah. The source raises a deep worry that federal regulatory aides, the DOJ and the FTC, seem more concerned with weighing how a proposed deal will affect the president's agenda than with the traditional issues of monopoly and dominance.
And that, if true, is a profound systemic failure.
It is. Historically, the mandate of the DOJ and FTC is to protect the consumer, to ensure market competition, to prevent monopoly. When politics becomes the primary driver of regulatory review for these massive media mergers, the fundamental checks and balances are just deeply compromised.
What does that mean for the average person listening? If the regulatory body that's supposed to protect competition is focused instead on political outcome, where does the public interest rank?
The unfortunate conclusion drawn by the source is that the public seems to have few champions left in this process.
Wow.
If the gatekeepers are prioritizing who is politically acceptable to the White House over whether the combined company dominates the market and raises prices on you, then the consumer has been completely abandoned.
So moving beyond the immediate WBD fight, the sources really paint this larger picture of systemic failure. They suggest that Hollywood has inflicted a lot of its own wounds, making it critically vulnerable to these outside corporate takeovers.
Absolutely. The film industry is widely criticized in the sources for failing to find a compelling way to make its case to consumers, to urge them to return. And this is more than just competition. It's a content problem that starts right at the top hierarchy.
And why do the sources feel the content itself is the...
Well, the current release schedules are condemned for being creative, filled with two main types of product. On one hand, you have creatively lagging blockbusters, sequels, remakes, retreads that just offer diminishing...
On the other hand,
you have niche appeal Oscar bait films. These highbrow dramas are designed for critical acclaim, but they have minimal mass market...
And neither of those categories seems to inspire the general consumer to leave their house, especially when the perceived quality difference between a theatrical movie and a high-budget streamer series has all but vanished.
Exactly. The studios aren't providing a must-see cultural event anymore. They're just providing more content.
And the irony here is just how self-destructive it all. The studios created this problem themselves.
They did. When the big media companies decided they absolutely had to launch their own streaming, Paramount plus HBO Max, Peacock, Disney plus, they poured billions of dollars into building an industry that needed lots of original content.
It was a massive, completely unsustainable spending spree. Every company wanted to be a big shot in the streaming war, competing with Netflix by just outspending them.
And that race to dominate streaming forced them to spend recklessly on original content that often failed to find an audience or even justify its production costs. And that resulted in the massive debt and operational instability that makes them so vulnerable today.
They burned through all their capital to win a war that, fundamentally, not everyone could win.
And this instability is now attracting global investment that carries its own set of risks, extending this beyond just domestic political fight.
Right. The sources raise concerns about wealth funds connected to Middle Eastern regimes with terrible human rights records, potentially getting involved in these high-stakes media acquisitions.
And that adds a whole new geopolitical layer. If content platforms or influential news outlets become majority-owned by state-backed funds from regimes with questionable transparency and human rights records, it raises immediate questions about editorialism.
And about what kind of narrative pressure might be applied globally.
It really speaks to that sharp political and financial pendulum swing we talked about earlier. The source notes that everything is getting pushed really hard the other way. They even mention a gaming giant like EA, feeling the pressures of political and social conservatism pushing back.
But the greatest long-term systemic challenge, far beyond any single acquisition, is what the source calls the consolidation trap.
The WBD acquisition, regardless of who wins, sets a chilling precedent for what could happen next in the already shrinking media universe.
The source outlines this hypothetical but terrifying chain reaction. What happens if Paramount buys WB and then a company like Apple comes along and buys Disney?
At that point, the source argues, we could realistically end up with one source for mainstream entertainment.
One source.
Meaning 2 or 3 global tech and media behemoths controlling the vast majority of everything the public can culturally and journalistically, the scope of choice and diversity would just shrink drastically.
And the comparison they draw is to the publishing industry, which has already consolidated so dramatically over the last couple of decades. It went from 6 major houses down to just 3 or 4 giants.
And that consolidation has a practical effect. I mean, the quality of books might remain high, but the decision of which voices get amplified and which experimental or niche books get published is limited to the tastes and financial calculus shrinking group.
It inherently limits new voices and experimental content that doesn't fit a proven commercial model.
But there is a counter-argument that's offered, one we often hear in the digital age.
All right, does consolidation even matter now? Anyone can technically publish content on Amazon or create independent content on YouTube or TikTok. The studio system's chokehold on culture is
And while that's technically true, the caveat is significant. Yes, anyone can publish, but they are still forced to compete with the massive budgets that a company like Warner Brothers can throw at marketing and production.
So even if the tools of creation are democratized, the tools of distribution and cultural amplification remain firmly locked in the hands of those few consolidated giants.
Exact. Source emphasizes that the sheer volume of content plus the algorithmic power of the giant means an independent creator today often competes against 50 years of Batman lore with a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign. It's an impossible fight. So what we've seen in this deep dive is that the fight for Warner Bros. Discovery is a perfect microcosm of a much larger power shift. The traditional media business is, well, it's imploding. It's driven by self-inflicted content wounds and massive streaming debt.
And at the same time, you have financial profit motives, stripped down to just asset mining, and increasingly aggressive political interests overriding traditional creative and journalistic standards.
It's the perfect storm.
So what does this all mean?
It means that ultimately there is no good scenario for Hollywood. Whether Netflix wins and drives down creator wages while hiking your subscription prices, or Paramount Television wins and potentially uses the platform for political aims, specifically with CNN.
The result for the overall creative infrastructure is the same.
It's the same. The process will be disruptive, and it will lead to fewer jobs and a decimated media landscape.
It forces us to reconsider the ultimate purpose of these corporate giants. If their goal is simply to strip mine the valuable IP, the Batmans, the Harry Potters, the established safe franchises, they're just living off the capital created by a previous, more stable era of content creation.
And if they only focus on mining the past, left create the next gen, and that's the provocative view, the list lore as this battle.